Nobody ever questions the silent infrastructure embedded into old buildings. You walk through historic city centers, former industrial districts, railway terminals, hospitals, universities. Government offices built between roughly 1870 and 1930. And you see the same details over and over again. Porcelain insulators fixed along brick walls. Thick ceramic cylinders mounted near rooftops. Rusted brackets where cables once ran. Metal conduits that now lead nowhere. They are everywhere, yet invisible. Ask almost anyone what they are, and you will receive a confident but shallow answer. Old electrical remnants. Early wiring. Primitive insulation from the dawn of electricity. The explanation feels sufficient, so no one questions it further. There is no mystery, no curiosity, no reason to dig deeper. The objects fade into the background of history. But if you step outside modern assumptions and examine how electricity actually functioned before stable, centralized grids existed, a very different story emerges. A story not built on speculation or conspiracy, but on documented engineering practice preserved in archives, technical journals, patents, maintenance logs, and internal correspondence between engineers, architects, and municipal authorities. Between the late 19th century and the early decades of the 20th century. Electricity was not a seamless utility delivered effortlessly through national networks. It was unstable, localized, intermittent, and highly dependent on building-level solutions. To cope with this reality, thousands of structures were equipped with internal electrical systems that modern observers rarely recognize or understand. These were not temporary experiments. They were carefully engineered, standardized systems designed to generate, store, regulate, and distribute electrical power locally within individual buildings or complexes. They operated commercially for decades, and then, within a remarkably short historical window, they disappeared almost completely. The core question is not whether these systems existed. The evidence is overwhelming. The real question is how they vanished so thoroughly that even highly trained modern engineers rarely realize they ever played a central role in early electrification. To answer that, we must begin by clearly defining what actually existed. By the 1880s, large buildings could not rely on a single external source of electricity. Municipal grids, where they existed at all, were unreliable and geographically limited. Voltage fluctuated wildly. Outages were common. For hospitals, factories, laboratories, and transportation hubs, this unreliability was unacceptable. As a result, buildings became electrical ecosystems. In Berlin, Vienna, Paris, London, New York, Chicago, and dozens of other cities, architects and engineers collaborated to design structures with integrated electrical infrastructure. These systems included localized generators, battery banks, voltage regulators, internal distribution networks, and isolation zones designed to prevent cascading failures. Ceramic insulators mounted along walls and rooftops were not decorative. They were essential components that allowed high-voltage conductors to run safely through masonry, exposed to weather, heat, and moisture. The Korite Hospital in Berlin installed an internal distribution network in the 1880s that allowed different wings to operate independently during electrical faults. Maintenance records preserved in municipal archives show routine inspections of insulator, integrity, conductor spacing, and leakage currents. Engineers documented performance meticulously, treating electricity as a critical operational resource rather than a convenience. Railway stations were among the most electrically complex structures of their time. Signaling systems, telegraph, offices, lighting, clock synchronization, and mechanical controls all depended on electricity. Before reliable grids, stations operated their own internal networks. Siemens technical manuals from the 1890s describe standardized ceramic insulator configurations for specific voltage ranges, complete with installation diagrams and load calculations. These manuals were not speculative. They were instructional. Documents for widespread deployment. Factories followed similar patterns. Textile mills, metalworks, and printing facilities installed internal electrical systems that combined generation, storage, and distribution. Battery banks smooth fluctuations. Internal wiring allowed production lines to continue operating during external outages. These systems increased productivity and reduced downtime in an era when electricity supply could not be taken for granted. All of this infrastructure was real, functional, and economically justified. Then something changed. Between roughly 1900 and 1925, the entire technological context shifted. Municipal electrical grids expanded rapidly. Generation capacity increased. Transmission technology improved. Costs fell dramatically due to economies of scale and competition. Reliability improved year by year. At first, internal systems were retained as backups. But as grid reliability crossed a critical threshold, the value of maintaining parallel infrastructure declined sharply. Corporate correspondence preserved in archives reveals this logic with striking clarity. A 1907 internal report from a Parisian municipal building authority calculates the annual maintenance cost of internal distribution infrastructure and compares it to grid electricity prices. The conclusion is blunt. The system still works, but it no longer makes economic sense. Complexity outweighs benefit. Similar documents appear across Europe and North America. Building managers complain not about failure, but about redundancy. Two systems require twice the oversight. Skilled technicians trained in internal systems become harder to find. Replacement components grow more expensive as manufacturers shift focus toward grid-compatible equipment. The dismantling begins. Internal conductors are removed during renovations. Ceramic insulators are discarded or reused as landfill fill. Copper. Wiring is sold as scrap. Battery banks are repurposed or replaced with grid-powered emergency systems. What remains are fragments isolated insulators, left behind because removing them offers no financial incentive. This physical disappearance happens quickly, but the intellectual disappearance is even faster. Asterisk engineering education adapts to future demand, not past practice. By the 1910s, textbooks reduce internal distribution systems to brief historical mentions. By the 1920s, they disappear entirely from curricula. Engineers trained for centralized grids have no reason to study obsolete. Architectures, manuals are discarded. Technical drawings are thrown away. Knowledge evaporates within a single generation by mid-century. The historical narrative simplifies itself. Electrification becomes a story of power plants, transmission lines, and national grids. Distributed building scale systems are erased. Not because they were insignificant, but because they no longer fit the dominant framework. What survives are vague references and misunderstood remnants. This simplification creates confusion decades later. People encounter physical traces without context. Explanations drift toward mythology or dismissal. Either the systems are imagined as secret lost technologies or dismissed as primitive failures. Both interpretations are wrong. The reality is more instructive. These systems worked. They were based on sound engineering. They served real needs in a specific technological environment. They disappeared not because they were fraudulent or suppressed, but because a superior alternative emerged and rendered them economically irrational. This pattern repeats constantly throughout technological history. Telegraph infrastructure vanished. When telephones became widespread, pneumatic mail systems disappeared when electronic communication accelerated. Mechanical computation was replaced by electronic processing. Each transition erased hardware, expertise, and institutional memory. The lesson is not about loss. It is about understanding how innovation actually functions. Technologies do not die dramatically. They fade through thousands of rational decisions made independently by engineers, managers, and institutions responding to changing conditions. Once a system loses economic relevance, preservation stops. Memory fades. History simplifies. The ceramic insulators still clinging to old buildings are not symbols of mystery. They are fossils of a transitional phase and technological evolution markers of a time when electricity was local, fragile, and deeply integrated into architecture itself. Recognizing this helps us understand the present. Many technologies we assume are permanent will disappear just as completely. Interfaces, infrastructures. Skills that seem essential today may become incomprehensible relics within decades. Understanding forgotten systems is not about reviving them. It is about recognizing patterns so we can navigate technological change with clarity rather than nostalgia or myth. If this examination of how functional, documented technology can vanish through economic evolution, not conspiracy, has deepened your understanding of innovation, support this work by engaging with the content. Subscribe for further investigations grounded in primary sources that reveal how technology truly evolves, disappears, and reshapes society. The forgotten past is not mysterious. It is a mirror if we choose to look closely.